What if I told you there was a tried and true method to see the source code of reality? Well, guess what? There is one. And on today's episode, I am going to be talking to Danny Goler, who found a method that you could do repeatedly that allows you to see the source code of any physical object. So without further ado, let's jump into the podcast. All right, beautiful people. It is Seibo Shen with another episode of the Silicon Valley to Spirituality Show. This is a guest that I've been waiting a very long time to get on the show. His name is Danny Goler. He's an independent researcher, and he has a methodology, a repeatable methodology for how you could see the fundamental nature of reality or the source code behind 3D physical space-time. Danny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, brother. It's a pleasure.
Oh man, so happy to have you here. I'm sure you're in busy demand. I've seen your video on Joe Rogan. I've seen tons of my friends have sent me your video, the discovery. And I guess, okay, before we jump in, I've seen the video. I've been very excited about it. So before I jump into questions, it might be good to level set with the audience here. So Danny, what have you discovered about the fundamental nature of reality, and what are we even talking about here?
So it's thank you so much for the question. It's a good guiding question. The short answer is I discovered that if you project a diffracted laser on the surface and you ingest DMT, you will see code running in surfaces. And this observation has now been substantiated by many people all over the world. And as I always say, maybe on the surface of it, these statements sound a little underwhelming because DMT was mentioned. And then you say, well, wait a second, isn't this the most psychedelic substance known to man? Wouldn't you expect something crazy to appear if you're using lasers and light and all kinds of things? No, I would not expect that because of the details of what DMT actually does and how it appears for people phenomenologically, it's very different than what we observe in the laser, which is also what makes it stand out. Usually with DMT, as probably a lot of people know, you seem to be transported to some kind of a new space, some kind of another dimension. And as um, as Joe Rogan once put it in one of his famous rants about DMT, he said, "It doesn't feel like you're in another dimension; you are in another dimension," and that is not an understatement. That is truly how it actually feels. So people who ever tried DMT, they know that is exactly what's going on. And then the question becomes, okay, but how can you tell, right? And that is exactly the question I asked myself. So for years, I've been doing DMT, experimenting with all kinds of psychedelics, and then I started having a series of experiences that were so much more realistic than even what DMT usually presents itself as. That at that point, even though I have zero background in neuroscience or anything like this, I had some experience in being a human, and I said, wait a second, that does not fall under the category of what I would call, hallucinations. Or if it is a hallucination, we need to reframe everything we understand about the brain because this is way too realistic on its own accord, and yet it seems to be completely untethered by anything that we know from this world. So it's not like you see some, it's not like the space in the DMT is consistent of some kind of building blocks that we've seen before. It's like you do mushrooms, you do LSD, you have slight departures from the tapestry that you see around you, or you see some conceptually interesting ideas, and but they are variations of things that you're familiar with. With DMT, it's not like that. It seems like you transported to some kind of a space where the space itself is completely orthogonal to anything that we're familiar with, and all of these things are very well known. I'm not saying anything new to anyone who's familiar, but I asked myself, I said, okay, hold on. Well, if the space is real, which was a big if even then for me, and I said, okay, if it is real, there has to be some things that we can say about it, right? Forget about even about the labels. I'm not. People say, do you mean from the scientific perspective? I was like, just from a rational, common sense perspective. If it's a real space, in other words, if it exists even when we're not looking, there has to be some truths that has to be true about that space. And then I started asking myself these questions, and for years I was trying to figure out what would be a way to discern and determine that. And eventually I landed, and it's a very long journey of about 5 or 6 years, which is why we're working on this documentary to kind of outline the moves that were made there. But after that period, I basically landed on this, on the surface of it, very simple idea that if you project a diffracted laser, something is supposed to happen. And I truly didn't even know when I came up with that idea. I didn't really know what's supposed to happen, but I tried it, and lo and behold, there's code running in the surface, and we're talking kind of like in the Matrix. You see, uh, it doesn't move like the code you see in the Matrix, but it kind of looks like the code in the Matrix, which is kind of strange. And before people jump into the confirmational cultural confirmational bias because everybody's seen the movie, yes, I've had people that have never seen the movie that sees the same thing. I've had people that I told them purposefully something else to throw their scent off of it, and they came back and said, "Well, I didn't really see what you said, but I saw these Japanese-looking things." So, for all intents and purposes, it kind of looks like the closest thing it looks like is like a mixture of katakana and Japanese katakana and Hebrew letters, and they're all kind of meshed together, and they're moving around in very complex patterns, and they move along different axes. So it's not just kind of like in the movie when it moves up and down, but it also rotates and it moves in these columns, and there's all kinds of things happening. And that is the shortest version I can present of what I found and how I got to it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that setup. And for those that haven't seen the video, I'll put a link to the video below. It is really cool. And what I think is really awesome about this is similar to you, or maybe not so similar, but I've been an atheist my whole life. I'm 48 now. For the first 44 years of my life, I've been an atheist. I've been doing psychedelics probably since my late teenage years. So I've had a lot of these psychonautic experiences and have felt, the interaction with different entities, different portals of knowledge, different visuals, never able to describe them properly to other people. And even though I was an atheist, I felt like, well, my tangible, regular day to day life is getting better. So whether this is real or not doesn't really matter to me. But when I saw your video, what actually switched me from being an atheist to someone that was more open to things outside of my five senses was I started being able to access some of these different states of consciousness without psychedelics. So I started wondering, like, what is going on here? And the katakana, the Hebrew words or symbols were exactly some of the things that I would see sometimes. So when I saw your video, I thought, wow, okay, now there's a way to show some of my friends that are kind of open to this. And I would say my audience are spiritually curious. Like I used to be, or I still am, an entrepreneur, but I run my business quite differently now that I have this sense of there's something greater than us. And so a lot of what I do with this podcast is, it's kind of like spiritually curious people, but are still kind of tethered towards a scientific, rational, logical thinking framework, and just talking about these things in a maybe utilizing quantum physics or more scientific language as opposed to more spiritual language to explain these things. Because I know when people would use spiritual vocabulary, it would just start turning me off. And it was actually my studies of quantum physics that started making me think, oh, whoa, maybe I'm not hallucinating. Maybe it's just like the waveform and I'm collapsing it and experiencing a certain type of reality. And so when I saw this methodology that you had, the first thing I started doing was researching, what is a 650 nanometer refracted laser, and realize, okay, it's not just like the laser leveler that I have at home. These things are a little bit more advanced. But how did you personally stumble upon this technique? Was it something that you had maybe some intuition this might work, or you just happened to have one of these lasers? I was curious, how was your discovery of this?
That's exactly what the movie is going to be following around. The thread is mostly around like how I actually arrived at it, and then we take it away from there, like to where we are now and all of that stuff. But the short version of that, no, it was a combination of these things. Just like you, I was a lot more scientifically minded than, let's say, spiritually minded. I was, to all for all intents and purposes, also on some kind of a spiritual journey, I guess, because I started meditating, and I started doing that pretty seriously since 2017, around there. And even though I've done, multiple retreats at that point, even still, my frame was always more, maybe atheistic is the wrong word, but there was no reason for me to think that there's anything outside of what we see at the moment. And of course, I don't think anybody with a rational mind would ever think that that means we're alone in the universe or anything like this. I don't think that thought makes any sense, right? I mean, talking about believing in magic, we're the only ones in all of that vastness. I mean, come on, that's a little bit, that's a stretch, right? So either we're extremely rare, but in an infinite universe, it would still occur infinite number of times, or there's something we don't understand. So my answer to the question, where are they? It's there's something we don't understand, and that thing is how consciousness can express itself in existence. And we have one idea of what it is because we're familiar with one example, but it was clear to me, even though I never really had any concrete way to substantiate this. It was clear to me that there's something that we don't quite get. That was my intuition. And then visiting these psychedelic spaces so often, I started building a world model. Not consciously, obviously, it's something that your brain automatically does eventually. And then things started becoming more and more coherent. And when they did, I all of a sudden started noticing certain things that I guess they were right on the surface, but because I was looking at it through a different frame, they were never apparent to me. So, for example, um, when I started having these series of very ultra realistic experiences on DMT, one of the things that all of a sudden became clear to me is that they are real. The entities there, they're real, because when we say the word entities, it's almost like oil. It's almost like just kind of slides off of you, like it's just like entities. Okay, yeah, I saw entities, but wait a second, you saw other beings? Like that never really kind of penetrates your psyche, what you're saying, right? Because I think there's always an assumption. It was like, well, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's like parts of my mind, I don't know. So I guess because of that, it's implicit to us that maybe it's just a mind trick, and because of that, we don't really make too much of a fuss out of it.
Right.
But when it became that ultra realistic, just to be clear, the first time that it happened, so people understand what I mean by realistic, I mean like a person appeared in my room. He wasn't a person, he was a frog person, but he was a person. Like there was somebody standing next to me and I could feel their physical presence. That's how real it was. So at that point, I was like, excuse me? Like, that's not the same as like when you're seeing the entities are kind of like in your periphery, or you feel their presence but you don't really see them. No, it was somebody, right? And at that point I said, okay, strike everything I think I know. This is clearly something is happening here. And it was showing me, it was trying to prove to me that he was real by telling me, go to the guitar and I'm going to show you something. And I was like, okay. At first, obviously, I thought he's going to try and communicate through music theory, and I'm like, I'm not a musician, I'm not going to understand anything you're saying, I'm just kind of practicing. He's like, go. I was like, okay. I go pick up the guitar, and he shows me with his frog fingers, like, where you strum and where you there. He's like, do this. And it was like he didn't say these words, but he was just, and I was like, okay. So then I started doing what he was showing me, and it made sense. Like the chords made sense. It was very slow. He was like, dren, dren. I don't remember what it was, but it made sense. And then I realized what he was saying. He said, you don't know how to do this. I'm telling you how to do this. This is real information.
Wow.
So I'm real. So I was like, so from that point on, I knew, okay, that's it. Strike everything I think I understand. And this is what started this search towards what I thought needs to be some kind of a way to discern whether the space is real or not. It's almost like I had the answer already. So I'm like, I know this is real now. Now I just have to figure out a way to prove that it is real. And then I started working from first principles. So I knew that certain things had to be true. I knew that if it was real and existing on its own side, then light had to be somehow involved, because I could see it with my eyes. Then I knew that if the space is real, it has to have some kind of a geometry by definition. If it's real, it has a coherence, so it has a geometry, even if it's not three dimensional, it makes no difference. And then there's certain things you can say about it mathematically, which is nice. Also, it would mean it has a topology. Also, it would mean that it would have to have some kind of an entry point for all of us, because sometimes we see it and sometimes we don't. So that means somehow we enter the space. Even if the space itself is infinite, notice that it makes no difference because sometimes we don't see it, which means that for us, there's some kind of a boundary from
Right.
which we enter to see it. So these were the working assumptions. And then I tried to ask them in the space. People always say, what do you mean by them?" Like, whatever, whomever they are, whatever it is that is living out there. And it was not. They would show me all kinds of things, but nothing that I can, you know, create a blueprint or and nothing like that. And later I understood that it's also not really possible. I don't know if it's not allowed, but they don't do that. This is why I'm always highly suspect when people say they told me A or B or C, whatever. They don't do that. They can't. Usually it's your own intuitions, and they just kind of give you maybe a little bit of hints, but they can't really
Right,
tell you.
right. Like a guide, but
Like
not
a guy,
not
yeah.
not a command.
Never. They can't be like, hey, combine zinc with, like, they can't do that. So then I was like, okay. And then this is where it kind of gets a little wacky. And I always say this part because it does get a little wacky from the perspective of if you're following any kind of scientific methodology. Uh, when I started thinking in the right direction, a few years after, all of a sudden I started getting hints, not in the molecule space, just like regular life. And I would get these weird synchronicities when I would walk down the street and I would see a set of numbers in a very particular moment when I was thinking about this subject very specifically. Like, for example, the first one was when I was thinking about the double slit experiment and the way that quantum computers work. The fact that they're, well, everything that people are now saying as if it's big news with Willow is like, oh, that means we're in a parallel universe. I mean, listen, David Deutsch was talking about this for 30 years. This is not news, right?
Right.
And that's exactly what I was thinking about, actually. That specifically David Deutsch's outline of the double slit experiment and the fact that light diffusion is only possible if parallel universes exist. Which sounds a little. What is the connection? Well, if you wouldn't have this gradation that we see of light diffusing is actually a quantum. It's a result of a quantum effect. You would not be able to have that if you wouldn't have at least something that is creating the diffusion, because you're not supposed to have that. If you have just one universe, you would have one beam of light and it would cut off. It would just be very clean. You wouldn't have this kind of diffusion looking thing. And there's very technical reasons for this, but that's essentially what I was thinking about. And that's also the same thing that quantum computers utilize, which is when the instance in which the coherence happens, the particle or the if you want to call it hyperparticle, like whatever it is in its totality, exists in this multidimensional state, and it essentially decouples from its own wave function, and it becomes only part of your reality. In that instance, you still have this one bit of communication between the worlds, which can be utilized through Deutsch equations to calculate kind of like how things work. So all of that was on my mind, and I was like, well, can we communicate between the realms through the diffusion of light somehow? This was a very early thought. And when I saw it, and when I thought that, I was looking at a stoplight, and I noticed that when the colors change, the diffusion looks different. Like if you squint your eyes in the middle of the night, you'll see that the way that the gradient of the light with the
Right.
different
Yeah.
colors look different. And then I obviously knew that there might be a large number of parameters here that needs to be studied. So like maybe the glass sits different, or I don't know. But something was telling me like, yes, look there, look in that direction. And then just when I thought that, I looked at the ground on the ground, and I saw these, Department of Water and Power. They write these numbers on the ground,
Yep.
and I saw the set of six numbers. And actually, at that moment, I because I was working. See, this is this is good, because now people will see how convoluted this is, and yet this is exactly the kind of things you have to follow if you want to come up with anything in that space. So I'm acutely aware that this sounds kind of crazy, but that's exactly how it happens. So I had this thought about whatever it is in physics. I look down, I see the numbers. Then I had a different thought. Oh, what if these numbers solve a color problem in my edit that I'm working on right now? Because I was working on an edit of a music video. So it never even occurred to me that it might be related to what I'm thinking. But then I took a picture of that because I thought, what if it just matches some kind of a lot number and it fixes my color problem? I go back to the house, I punch in these numbers in the spotlight on a Mac. It comes up with one hit, and it's not on my computer. It found something random online that matches these six numbers, and that is the DOI number of a paper put out by CERN talking about searching for particles outside of the standard model a year after the
Wow.
discovery of the Higgs boson. So I was like, and then obviously in that instance, I remembered, I was like, oh my God, I was looking at that light right when I looked down. I was thinking, forget about the fact that it's physics, the fact that it's talking about the Higgs boson, the fact that it's talking about particles outside of the standard model. Is there more beyond? I was like, okay, this is crazy. So then I kind of started paying attention to things like this. And it took another 3 years, I think, of this kind of thing happening every once in a while. And I would always record. I would always write it down, write my notes, take a picture, whatever it was. I have a full folder of all of these things. And eventually, when I already started dating now my now fiance, back then we were just started dating, and we were in a botanical gardens, and I told her about all this stuff. I told her, these numbers appear for me. Oh, and the number 42 started following me like crazy. The answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Hmm.
um and then, if you're somebody else, if it's not happening to you, you go, okay, cool story. Like, what do you do with that, right? Like, it's like, I could just be, I just felt grateful she didn't leave me because I told her I talked to aliens. But then we were in the botanical gardens, and we started talking about why plants are green, right? Because they reject green. That's why they're green. It's the only color they don't use for photosynthesis. And she knows a lot about plants, so she started explaining all kinds of things to me. And then I had the same feeling that I had that first time with the numbers that told me, yes, look there. And I was like, okay, something like I feel that feeling again. So then we step outside the botanical gardens. It was a extremely hot day. It was like 115 degrees. I'm calling an Uber to go back to the hotel, and she had to cross the street and stand in the shade because it was too hot for her. And she went and stood under a tree. Called the Uber, crossed the street. I hug her. And then I, obviously, because I'm taller, I'm looking like that, and I was like, "Oh, Kelsey, look down." And she looks down, and she's standing on the number 42.
Wow.
So so for me, what it meant, again, we kind of laughed, and she was like, "Oh my God, this is crazy." I'm like, "I'm telling you, this is happening all the time." So then, to me, what it meant is she's standing on the number, so she's a key somehow. So I was like, okay. So then together, she's a researcher. So we started going down the rabbit hole together. I started showing her all the stuff because now she's listening. I showing her all the different papers that appeared for me over the time. And together we kind of like sitting in a restaurant and going on our own phones, each one doing on their own rabbit hole. And then at this, I think, if I remember correctly, we kind of turned to each other at the same time and was like, said, it has to be a laser. It's like, what, 650? Yeah, 650. So it's like, okay, so then we're like, oh, well, obviously this is a sign. Like, we arrived at the same thing, right? But I still didn't know what it meant. I was just like, okay, well, I guess we get a laser. It was like, sure. And it was during COVID, so you couldn't get a laser, ironically, anywhere aside from China. And it took like 3 months to get to you because everything was backed up. So then I ordered this like super riggedy basic laser thingy, and I had to build like a circuit for it. You couldn't order one that you can just make work. And I turned it on, and the rest is what I told you. Like, all of a sudden I see the code, and I was like, oh my God. And she goes, what's happening? I was like, there's a code running in the wall. So then I started showing other people, and everybody saw the same thing. So to tie it into a short, now that people understand the details, to tie it into a short answer to your question, which is what was the actual way that I arrived at it, it's always a combination between strong intuition at the right time and some understanding that you have about the world that is a lot more technical. And one thing that as I'm more and more talking about this publicly, I'm starting to realize that's actually not that different than how we do things in science. It's just that the ontology you're sampling from is much wider. So then it feels, when you're talking about a set of expertise in science, if you give them this wide lens, they go, "That's nuts." But really, all I did is I just expanded the aperture. It's kind of hard to say why you think all these things are connected. But if you're willing to play that game and you don't lose your mind, which is a real possibility, then you can bring something in that is a lot more robust and actually says something about much more about reality as a whole, because that's the pool you were sampling from. You weren't sampling from this one domain of expertise where this one extra thing was just added because now you know that this ribosome is going to do this one other thing because you tested it for months, and now you know that it does affect this in this way, these conditions. Sure, but it's important, but it's a very myopic view of what the world as a whole is doing. And the only way to actually bring answers about the full picture is by being able to sample from this larger, family of data points. And it is quite a task to convince people in what we now call science, which I think should be the definition should be expanded, honestly, that this is a viable way of doing things. And one final note on that before I throw it back to you. I just posted on X this thing that just came to me last night, actually, and it was kind of one of these things where, for lack of a better term, was like channeled. Like I wasn't thinking at all. It just came as an impulse, and I just wrote the whole thing. There were not even typos in there, which is crazy because I'm dyslexic. Like truly, that's actually kind of crazy. And I just like wrote the whole thing down. And what it was, and I can share the post with you after, but simply is that I realized that the only way to find a viable answer to, if we are interested in answering kind of like the more unified thing, it would have to include the observer. It cannot disregard the observer anymore, and it would have to do with some kind of a ever-present quality to the observer, no matter the scale or the complexity. And the way that I found to reconcile that, or the way that it was, came to me, is that you would have to find the delta, the difference between the complexity of the observer, which you can actually calculate with a number, probably with something like phi from integrated information theory or something like that, and the horizon, the distance of the horizon that observer can see things, both spiritually, physically, and conceptually, like through mathematics. And that delta would tell you something very fundamental about reality.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was really awesome. And I think what I really wanted to get across in that answer was for the people listening that, you're not someone that's just super into psychedelics, hoping to see some code. And, you really approach this in a way that someone that maybe had a more, what's the word I'm looking for? Attachment to like something that could be scientifically provable, would be like, okay, hey, this guy Seibo, this guy Dan, they're not just these psychonauts looking for stuff that confirms their bias. I work in the cannabis industry. I make cannabis hardware. So I think automatically when I start talking about aliens or things like that, they're just like, well, of course you smoke weed all the time. You eat mushrooms all the time. Of course you're into this stuff. And, the reality is, even though I had these transcendent experiences, I was quite skeptical. I just thought, well, I just did something called dimethyltryptamine. It's called the spirit molecule. So yeah, maybe I just had some neurons fire in a specific sequence, and I thought the sacred geometry I was seeing was more meaningful than it was. But the deeper that I went into this, it was just kind of like the more that I uncovered, the more I started realizing, like, wow, actually, what I believe is like when you consume something like DMT, you're actually seeing more of reality versus less of reality. And as you said, it's widening your aperture to be able to see these types of things. And you said a bunch of things that I wanted to kind of interrupt, but You
You
know,
can. By the way, feel free to interrupt me. I'm very yeah. That doesn't. Some people it really bothers them. It doesn't bother me at all. Just
okay,
interrupt me. Yeah, yeah,
I appreciate that. But you
yeah.
were saying some pretty profound things, so I wanted it to go. But okay, so a couple of things that kind of hit my mind. Number one was you just said you had something come to you yesterday and then you were just typing, and typically you're dyslexic, so but this typing was coming out without any dyslexia. Have you
I
been
put it into
able
ChatGPT. Hey, check for typos. It says no typos. I was like, but literally, I had to peel back the my eyebrows from the back of my head. I was like, what?
so is it common for you to kind of like just channel this type of
No,
information, or
no.
that
It
was
just came to me because I was listening. Somebody sent me. People always send me, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And obviously, at this point, I have to just disregard most of it. Also, because it's mostly repetitive. People just repeat the same mistakes, and in the way they analyze information. And but it was someone that I deeply respect, and they also really came through for me recently. So he was like, "Hey, I know that you're super busy, but can you check this out? Tell me what you think." And it's just this guy who's reading a bunch of the uh, you know available theories that are attempting to kind of come at the theory of everything kind of thing. Very obscure channel, like not even a known. It's just like, "Hey, what do you?" It's like an hour long, and I was like, I was like, okay. And I put it on obviously 125 speed, and I just started listening to it while I was washing the dishes. And about one third way in or something like this, it all of a sudden hit me. What hit me is that I understood what is wrong about people's analysis of all of these things as a whole. And that is that they're constantly trying to come at this from like all these different angles. All of them completely disregard the one thing that is you always, always, always there and will always have to be there, logically, which is the observer. And then the same day, I had a conversation. Yesterday, I was I sometimes join the IPI lectures. If you that guys are not familiar, I highly recommend it. It's a physics organization journal, information physics organization journal from England, led by Melvin Vopson. And Melvin over the years became a good friend, and he always invites me to kind of come and eavesdrop. And it's like usually physicists or mathematicians kind of lecturing about something new. And just like like yesterday morning, I listened to this lecture by this guy who's a mathematician, and he tries to propose a theory that would explain everything in physics in terms of knots. So not mathematics is a very complex thing, and then he found a way to basically reconcile everything, including the interaction of all the particles and fields and everything else. Super interesting, very elegant work. And we had a little bit of a back and forth. And at first, when I asked him some of the questions about some of the stuff that I'm interested in, I think he thought I'm asking more from like a philosophical perspective, and it's understandable because it sounds big. And then when we had another moment to interact, I kind of made it clear to him that I'm not approaching it from like a, pie in the sky kind of point of view, but I'm asking him, do you have a way to include the observer in the model? And he actually entertained the idea and he said, well, I'll be honest, this is a very big question that I am interested in. But the problem is, and he nailed it. The mathematicians have such a good way of like really pinning down the problem. It's amazing to me always. And he said, "Well, the problem is that where's the handle?" And I thought, what a brilliant way of putting it. He said, what is it that I can grab mathematically? What are you asking me about? What is the handle? What is the handle of the observer? How can I understand what you're asking me, but what is that number that you want me to entertain, or set of numbers that you want me to entertain that will represent the observer? And I thought, boom, that's what we need. Now, in integrated information theory, you have something called phi, which is supposed to be, I think it's the difference between the complexity of a network and how much back propagation it has in any given density of the nodes or something. I don't remember exactly, but it is, and it is to some degree, it to some degree does work in the real world, even by because they managed to predict from a set of vegetative and locked-in syndrome states, and they could discern who is who. Because in one of them, no one is home, and in the other one, there is consciousness that just can't move, and they could, by using their models, to kind of discern who is who, right? Which is interesting. So then I thought, so that was already writing on my mind, right? And then I had this when I was washing the dishes and listening to this guy. I was like, oh my god! Like, first of all, that's great because he kind of condensed all the different theories we have, and it's exactly what I needed to hear to see the pattern of like where the mistake happens. And then that thing just came to me. It's just like it was such a strong impulse. It's just like, okay, let me just almost like I'm answering that friend that asked me to watch this. But at the same time, what came out is just the complete, what as far as I can tell, big picture, as far as the outline, that says it's pretty hermetically sealed. So it contains all the elements that needs to be. Now, obviously, the work of going to the details and calculating each thing will require probably decades. But that I think that's really a one potential way of tackling the problem, which will include the observer as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. And you also just kind of casually said, but I love aliens, and but you casually kind of said to me, explaining the story, was like, yeah, I was telling my fiance now, but girlfriend at the time, I could speak to aliens. Like, is this on DMT? Is this without DMT? What is this type of
Yeah, for me
communication?
only on DMT. I'm still waiting for the day to reach the level that you're at, where you get to interact with these spaces without the molecules, which I'm hearing more and more about, and I would actually love to explore that with you because it's. By the way, yours it didn't start happening more around 2019, did it?
I had I like to call it my awakening
Yeah.
in June of 2020. My wife and I, we had done 7 grams of mushrooms each. And we both had this vision that I was going to step down from running my company. And at that time, we had just went from 6 to 7 to 8 figures in those 3 years. And so in the prior 5 years, we were in the red. So for many people, when I told them I was going to step down from running my company, they just thought like, he must be crazy. But when my wife had the same vision that I had in separate rooms, it was hard for me to reconcile. Well, I had my own personal vision. She had what seemed to be an overlapping vision. And then the next day, she sat me down to do this 90-minute Joe Dispenza meditation. And in that meditation, I had an interaction with that same being. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I just have a bunch of psilocybin still kind of going through my system. And I did the meditation the next day. And the long story short is I've done a 90-minute meditation of some sort, whether it's just you know focusing on my breath, transcendental breath work, whatever. But I just committed to doing 90 minutes of meditation every day. To What was shown to me was like, Seibo, you got to broaden your frequency band. If you broaden your frequency band, you can touch these higher frequential portals of knowledge or interact with them without plant medicines. And so I just committed to that 90 minutes every day. So it's been, close to 4.5 years now. And in many ways, I lost like my previous set of friends, all the people that I used to do business with, even people in the cannabis space. They thought, well, that's cool. But, like when we do medicine journeys, it's like we go to this realm and then we come back to reality. And I was saying, no, this is like the dream state. That's more like reality. So it was really challenging initially. So when I see things like yours, where I feel like I'm kind of at the point of my spiritual journey where like I'm the desire to prove things to other people.
Oh, you're out of the closet. That's it.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
you
yeah.
just yeah, it is what it is, and you have to deal with it, not me.
Correct, correct. But, I do have, like I said, a lot of like spiritually curious friends or psychedelic curious friends. And, when I showed them your video, it really kind of just opened them up like, whoa, okay, it's not just your hallucination, it's everyone is seeing the same code. And then I guess maybe the next question is, since you've been looking at this for a while, is, well, now that we know that there is code to this physical reality, well, what next?
That's a great question. I don't know. That's the honest answer. I'm only following what it seems appropriate in the moment, which I guess is a little bit more of the Buddhist perspective, a little bit. Um, I'm a long time Vipassana meditator, and that really instills a certain kind of attitude that helps you just kind of being okay with not knowing anything beyond the horizon
Mm,
that's available to you. And it's nice conceptually, but it's even nicer when you truly embody that attitude. It's very freeing. And so, if I have to give you the honest answers, I have no clue. But if I have to give you the more, you know, terrestrial answers, I think there is a good potential here that we literally going to rewrite science as a whole. Because if we understand what this code is doing in relationship to what we know about reality already, we can create a Rosetta Stone that will be mapping certain code, the behaviors of the code with different effects that we can induce, and that can potentially help us build new technologies or understand something very fundamental about the world that we couldn't before, because now we have a screen that tells us what the thing is doing, like directly. And so that will be my best guess. Recently, we've discovered that the code, or at least the observation of the code, seems to be changed by magnets, which we never noticed before. So if you project the laser on a magnet, this is the only time where we see a scrambling of the code.
Oh, wow.
That's very interesting. Now, it's possible that it has something to do with the interaction of light and the magnet, most likely, actually. But for all intents and purposes, the magnet that we're using, like 10-pound magnets, like things like a simple horseshoe magnet you can get from Amazon, they're not supposed to be doing anything visible to light that we would discern. Over a certain level of magnetism, you would create something called the Zeeman effect, but that would have to be around the element, so like around the diode. So yeah, you would see an effect there, which is actually what we're aiming for. Because I believe this might show us you're going to jump to the next stable state. Kind of like when you do cymatics, right? You see the pattern of the sand on the plate, and then when you crank up the frequency, it first kind of jumbles up into nonsense, and then it freezes in a new stable state, in a new standing wave, right? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm kind of thinking that the same thing would happen here. Now it's a big assumption, but if we're right, that will be a huge breakthrough. Because if I can prove that across individuals, everybody sees the same jump of whatever it is to the new stable state, it tells us something very fundamental about what we seeing in the code. And but before I forget, I do want to ask you about this, about what you were saying about your experience. First of all, if you don't mind sharing either the link or where I can find that 90 minutes meditation, because
Yeah,
more
I'll
and
send
more,
it to you.
more and more people were telling me about Joe Dispenza's work, and in the beginning I was very skeptical, but more and more people that I now see for sure are experiencing things, telling me about it. So I definitely want to try. Um, but I think that ultimately what we want to do, and I believe from what I'm hearing from people, that's what Joe Dispenza is already doing, but we want to connect our technical abilities with our spiritual abilities. We want to merge. It's not either or. It's the gates open when you allow for the two hemispheres to talk to each other very openly.
Yeah, absolutely. The integration of that. And you know what you were reminding me as you were saying about like these advanced technologies that, or kind of shifting the framework of how we look at technology or science. You know, I remember there was like a Nikola Tesla quote about, you know, we'll make so much more progress once we start studying energy and frequency as opposed to just physical objects. And, you know, I 100% absolutely believe that. And are you familiar with an individual by the name of Donald Hoffman by any chance?
Yeah, yeah. I actually was one of the first people I reached out to.
Okay, okay, yeah. You know, he was actually when I started listening to him was around the time when COVID started, and I started doing those really long meditations. So, you know, it gave me this idea. Okay, hey, there's someone that sounds kind of rational that's talking about maybe the fundamental nature of reality isn't space time, but it's actually consciousness, and
Hmm?
space time is a property of consciousness. You know, that really engaged my curiosity, and I guess
For me, the trifecta before you continue is if you combine Hoffman's model, Stephen Wolfram's new physics model of hypergraphs, and Bernardo Kastrup's vision of idealism, I think those are your fundamentals to understand what the world really is.
that's super cool. I've heard of those two other names, and I've watched some of Bernardo's other videos and things, and it's really interesting just thinking or hearing about how other people perceive this. And you know, so one of the interesting things is, you know, I came from a very logical, rational, scientific based background. You know, when I was making vaporizers, it was all about the cannabinoid science, the flavonoids, the boiling points, the sublimation points, things of that nature. And so I also grew up going to Catholic school, so I know what it's like to be around religious people. And then when I had my spiritual awakening, we moved out of San Francisco, we bought a farm, we started homesteading, and then I met a whole bunch of spiritual people online. And so kind of my observation of these three different types of groups, I would put like, if you're too logical and rational, it could lead to like burnout and fatigue of the mind. If you're too religious, it turns into like dogmatic beliefs and attitudes. And then if you're too spiritual, it could be like almost like overly delusional. Like some of the spiritual folks that I've met, they just think entities, beings are cursing this, cursing that. And, I have some openness to all those things, but I found that kind of having like a more balanced perspective, allows us to bring in these higher frequential ideas and then apply them to our daily practical lives. And that's what I really love about what I think you're showing is like we're starting to get to this point with science and technology where we can start explaining some of these metaphysical concepts. I remember when I was speaking to my Jewish friend, he was like, Seibo, have you read the Kabbalah? And I was like, no. He goes, well, in the Kabbalah, they have a lot of similar principles where there's only one thing and there's many layers to like reality. And then my friend that was into Hinduism told me the same thing. They talk about physical reality as the illusion or Maya, and there's different like realms of frequential densities that people have conscious experiences through. So, I was curious. You had said that um, you kind of have or you were, I think the spiritual journey was kind of in parallel with the discovery of this. And I was curious, as you got deeper into spirituality, did this discovery start meaning like different things to you?
It's interesting, for me personally, they are actually kind of like oil and water. They don't really mix,
Mm.
which is interesting because the more I listen to people, even people like you that are going through the awakening, and I met some people that showed me some miraculous things, so I know there's a there. But at least when I go to the DMT realm, it's clear to me that it's not what we would call spiritual. It's just a very advanced civilization. And there's a difference. People say, well, it sounds like it would be the same. It wouldn't. So what God is would be very different than a very advanced civilization. You could tell the difference. There's something very technical about the DMT space. It's very mechanical. it's the have fun, baby. It's the um, it's the cogs. It's the things that make the physical system run. There are other realms that I believe are higher that, for all intents and purposes, would feel more divine. But I think that within the frame of what it really is, I would personally categorize them more as they're simply operating on such higher dimensional realms that to us we don't have conceptual frameworks to fold them into. It's impossible. So we have to borrow something from our human world to try and categorize that, and that the best way we can, because of how we get constructed, is what we call the spiritual, or we call the divine. um, but they are more kind of like the architects. There's like levels, right? And then you have the management company, which is more the DMT space. And they're very mechanical. They're insectoids. They're very mechanical. They're very like, just like, oh, how you doing, Bob? Like, it's very straightforward. But they're in this hive and they're weaving reality. Literally, that's what they do. I've seen very clear demonstrations when they showed me how things work, where I could see literally like a almost like a, in a factory where they build computer chips, and you
Hmm.
have the thing that solders the chips, like that
Yep.
kind of. So I saw that going, and then I didn't understand what the relevance of that was. It was obviously in this like hyper super futuristic kind of like environment, and it was doing something, and I was like, okay, well, that I don't know what that is. But then I realized it was tracking what I was deciding. So it was basically going like this, and then I would move around the room, and it would like accelerate and slow down. And then I was like, oh. So then I stopped my gaze between the mirror and a vase that was in the room, and I kind of blurred it, so I wasn't looking not at the mirror, not at the vase, but they were both kind of like equally in my visual field. So I'm not really picking any of them. I'm not choosing to look at any of them. I just kind of, and the thing stopped. It just went,
Wow.
and then I looked at one of them. It goes, "Doo, doo, 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 doo," it keeps on going. So it's like it registers every single thing we do. Now, the ultimate plan of it, it seems to be able to answer the ultimate questions, like how everything came from nothing, because apparently nobody knows in existence, not even God. And that's why all the simulations run. But that seems to me betraying, knowing that on other levels, like on our level, seems to be betraying some of the functionality. So, in order for the simulation to be complete, beings like us, even when we started becoming aware of the larger space of the simulation, so like the more of the beings, and which is, I believe, will actually happen this year, time will tell.
I
Uh,
agree.
yeah, and then basically, if we still need some vehicle, some, I don't want to say conceptual, but some imprint of our being has to entertain some shape. So like it has to map onto something that means something to us so it can move us emotionally, because that's how it registers everything that's going on inside of us. So if we just believe that it's these, we're cogs in a machine, it would create a functionality in us that is it doesn't serve the purpose of the full simulation. It wants us to explore the possibilities that they themselves cannot know that can happen. That's the whole point of it. It's completely open ended. Well, the only thing that is simulated is the environment, not your agency or the outcome. That is completely open. So the way that I see it is that, or at least that's the best way I found to reconcile these two things that you asked me about, which is that the spiritual component is more the container. It's the framework through which we can have the healthiest trajectory through the simulation. It's the most cushiony one as well. And the second you pop your head out into the more technical thing, it's a little jarring. It's a little like, whoa, okay. I don't know if I need to see that. But it's like, it's because it's very, somebody described it to me once as like the cold truth. And that can be a little jarring, right? Because it makes you feel like a puppet. It makes you feel like you're not on the top of the food chain, which is very concerning for people. But also, it's not necessarily that relevant for most things inside of the trajectory of what human evolution is. However, it is also possible and not forbidden for any beings on any level to be aware of the more technical aspect of the way that things work if they choose to do so. And that can be folded into their understanding and into their experiences. And that is why creating the transition between seeing it from what it more of what it really is, which is the technical thing, to how we choose to proceed as a species, to have this more cushiony ride. That's a challenge. That's something that requires a lot of engineering in terms of language, how you talk about it, how you emote around it, which is a real. I think it will be a whole new science very soon. Is like how to emote properly and how to have communication that takes that into account. But to me, when I'm seeing, it's almost like I can see both. It's almost like I have my I'm in between the wall, and I can see this side, I can see this side at the same time, and it is a little, it's a strange position to find yourself in, because I also know that it's not for everybody. So it's almost like you also have to make some calculation as to who is supposed to be exposed to this, even if they really want to. So what I tend to do now, when I bring people to like either sessions when they ask me to show them, or somebody asks me to tell them how they can do it. Uh, One of the biggest things I'm following is you make everything available, and then you leave it to them to basically make the decision, because very often what would happen, people would like smoke and they would have their experience, and some people would just, they would not only not forget, but they would like get up and run and go to the laser right away, and they're like, oh my god, okay, I'm like, well, that for you, I guess it's a fuck yes, right? But certain people, they will forget the laser is there, and I don't think it's a coincidence. I will never remind them. I will never, hey, do you want to look at the laser? No, never. That means either the molecule or their, for lack of a better term, their soul whatever they are in their deepest sense, they don't want to interact with that right now. So, and that's totally good. That's exactly what it needs to be. The way of the Tao is really the only way to maneuver through this, because then you start interacting with concepts that are very dangerous, which is trying to impose worldviews, impose frames. You can't be doing that. That's especially now, everybody needs to fall into the frame that they're most comfortable with. Either it's a scientific one, spiritual one, you pick your flavor. And that's also the world you're going to find yourself in. So that gets into a little bit more of a deeper discussion as to how realities unfold. But we are, at the moment, the way that I see it, we are literally going through a major train station where we all see each other. And some of us are from parallel universes, literally, like we're not even in the same universe. And then we will depart again, but right now we can see each other. So the best we can offer to one another is openness, so we can learn from one another and what is possible in any possible kind of world or worldview. But at the same time, you cannot force your worldview on anybody else, because it might not be their trajectory, and you have to allow them to move on with whatever their timeline is supposed to be unfolding as.
Yeah, that very much tracks with um, when I meditate. I would say I usually connect with. I just call him my higher self, and when someone asks who is that, I just say it's just a version of me with the higher level of consciousness that I can access. And so usually when I can't figure out something with my brain, I'll just go into a meditation and try to connect with my higher self and see if I can bring in any information. Sometimes it's like a 14.4K baud dial-up connection. Sometimes it's a T1 connection. I don't have much control over what the connection is like. But one of the very, very consistent themes that I get is my higher self is always telling Seibo, yeah, just share what you know, share what you've experienced. But if someone is resistant to it, if it doesn't resonate with someone, never try to push it. That's just not part of like their path right now. But those that are excited about it, that are engaged with it, they'll be able to find you. Just share. And you use the word parallel universe, and about 4 or 5 months ago, I was really trying to figure out, like, well, when people say parallel universe, parallel realities, what do they actually mean? And I've only experienced time linearly, so it's hard for me to think about like time being this construct of humanity to track a certain amount of time that goes by. And so I started meditating on this concept, and what kind of triggered me to share this with you was like you were using the word frames. So the first thing I was asking was, well, when someone says parallel universe, parallel reality, what do they actually mean? And so what it was showing me was it communicated to me just in my mind's eye is the best way I could describe it. It was showing me, think of a parallel reality as just one picture, like a picture. And that picture is timeless. So that parallel reality is also timeless. And so think about there's one picture for everything that has ever happened, one picture for everything that will ever happen. And just imagine it's like stored on the Amazon Web Services of the universe somewhere. Maybe someone else more spiritual leaning would call it Akashic Records or something like that. And then so it was telling me, okay, so like this is one reality, this is one reality, this is one reality, this is one reality. And they all look very similar to each other, but they have nothing to do with each other. They just look similar to it. And what it was showing me was that our consciousness, what we do is we project our consciousness into like a physical meat vehicle, kind of like Avatar. It's like you have this sentience, and the sentience can observe. But when you put it into Danny or Seibo, that sentience then has consciousness, then becomes like a subjective experience of like Trump's awesome or Trump's whack, right? You could watch the same debate. Some people walk away thinking he's great. Some people walk away thinking, he's horrible, but it's the same reality, right? But just different experience of that reality. And so what it was showing me
Mhm.
was like there will be synchronicities or like little things of guidance, like, yeah, those 6 numbers that you randomly saw that led you to, this research paper with the Higgs boson. There's like your girlfriend standing on the number 42, which gives you more insight. It's that there are these, we have free will, but there are like these little things that will kind of guide us in a direction to like explore things. And so as we get guided towards exploring certain things, like, oh, I'm going to move to San Francisco. Then all the different places you could have moved to, all those different frames of possible future realities disappear. Just all the frames for homes in San Francisco are in your potential future. And then as you go from like a specific zip code to a specific house, then all those other frames disappear. And then once you have like your timeline that you'll experience, then your consciousness acts as the projector, and that projector will then play those frames in a fast enough sequence where it feels like one continuous reality. So it was showing me a timeline contains a bunch of different parallel realities. Some of those parallel realities could overlap, but then, like you said, it's kind of like you have that window. It's like, yeah, you're in the same reality, but then, you guys choose different things and you guys kind of go into your own separate ones. And what it was really showing me was, Seibo, if you continue to meditate, when people say you expand your consciousness, what does that actually mean? So it was telling me that when you continue to meditate or you do any type of inner work that allows you to expand your consciousness, your frame rate starts increasing. So, like a normal person might see reality at 30 frames per second, a master meditator might be at like 500 frames per second. It was showing me that like athletes that are playing like at this incredibly high level are like functioning at like 1,000 frames per second. So when there's only like a half second to shoot the ball, it's just time feels different
Oh,
for them. Yeah. And it was like such a kind of cool little analogy. And I wanted to share that with you. And just, I saw you nodding your head. So maybe
yeah,
you kind of had a similar idea, or I was just curious, how did
yeah.
that land with
The only thing I might add to that is that from what I was seeing is that uh, all of the everything you said is correct, and what I saw in addition to that is that we have you have everybody's frame inside of one, what you would call, I guess, one timeline. They're all frames of possibilities within that timeline, and then there's a consensus that is created by the average of all of these frames. So it's almost like reality is being told by all these different nodes, like neurons, what makes sense, and then it would build the thing that makes sense. But it is still valid to talk about a completely separate parallel universe, physical parallel universe, and it would be defined similarly to what is a different species of an animal. A different species is defined by the fact that they can no longer mate.
Hmm.
So, so you have subspecies which can still mate and it might make weird things, but a different species can no longer make a baby with the other species. That's it. And notice that this is true across the board with any informational pattern. Languages follow the same trajectory. There's dialects, which is like subspecies. You can kind of understand, but it's already hard. And then a different language you can no longer understand unless you study it, right? So then it's a different species. It's a completely different language. And if you look at the through Shannon's information theory and other models that take into account informational perturbations, you would notice that that's actually just that's a fact about how information evolves. And in that sense, when you have fungibility that causes all the variation of the different kinds of frames, you would have a situation where all of a sudden you have a split of a physical timeline where they can no longer mate, which means that whatever trajectory is happening now here, it's simply irreconcilable with this one. So it
Hmm.
will just apart. The universe still wants to see what happens in this one too, so it will keep going, but it splits them apart. So now they're no longer, you can no longer remerge them. If the right set of events will unfold in such a way that the universe can see, okay, that can actually technically work together, then it will start remerging them again, and then it would
Hmm.
happen. And then, so I'll give you one example that is kind of interesting because it's recent and everybody are talking about it, and I found it extremely fascinating. So I'm sure you heard of the telepathy tapes or watched, listened to all of them, right?
Not only that, Danny, is I was literally thinking about the telepathy tapes right now.
Okay,
Right
there
now.
you go.
So,
There you go.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that tells us about what universe we're in. However, here's the interesting part. So Kelsey is a speech pathologist, my fiance. Not only she's a speech pathologist, she's a really good one. In other words, she's like kind of reached the highest level you can reach before you start your own clinic. So like, multiple clinics all over this United States would like use her as like to train other ones, and she would manage clinics and all that stuff. And basically she can do whatever she wants. Like she's on such a level at this point in that field that they're like, here, whatever you, red carpet, whatever you want, because she proved herself to be so competent
Mm-hmm.
in that field. And I'm saying this not to boast her, but just to emphasize the fact that the reason she was so good is because she's extremely smart, very attentive, deeply caring, very loving, and she's really good at solving problems, like exceptionally good at solving problems. And all it is basically every kid is a whole new problem. It's like, what is wrong? Because you don't know. There's so many different reasons as to why kids are nonverbal, and it's not just being on the spectrum. There's so many different reasons. There's sometimes physical, sometimes mental, sometimes a combination of the two, and all of these details are very important. So she worked with families for years. One of the biggest jobs of a speech pathologist is to work with the parents to educate them as to how to behave with the kids, as to help the kid to, become better over time, because they spend the most time with them. So she said something interesting because we were listening to it, and we both find it fascinating and we're both totally on board, right? But then she said, so she didn't say it from a skeptical perspective. She just stated a fact. She said, what's interesting? In all the years I've been in the field, I never met one. I was like, huh. Because notice, in the telepathy tapes, the claim is that all of them are. Not some, all of them. And she never met one. Now, it's possible that she just, if you're not looking for it, you don't see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, well, wait a second. First of all, this resonates, right? So, like, again, we're both on board because I think everything they're saying is true. And then I was like, but how can we reconcile this with the fact that she's like, I would notice if something like this was going on. Like,
Right.
because I'm really paying attention, right? And I was like, well, is it possible that we are from different timelines? Like, is it possible that in our timeline that's not a thing? And in whatever telepathy tape's coming from, that timeline, that's absolutely a thing. And now, because that is reconcilable, we're merging timelines and we're like, oh, interesting. And now we're going to start learning from each other what else is possible. Because they also said stuff in their thing that simply doesn't track with how the field is operating, according to her. She said, well, first of all, that either she's misrepresenting the information a little bit, which is possible, but it's definitely not the case that speech pathologists would try and recommend you away from a lot of that's just not true. Like that the whole job is to like try and encourage you as much as possible to do the thing. So it's possible that in their timeline that there's a little bit more strictness, a little bit more kind of like removal of the thing, right? And then in our timeline it's a little bit more actually caring in that way, but we don't have the telepathy part. So like, but overall as ultimate wave function informational pattern, that thing is possible. It's just that the consensus in whatever timeline I'm in, the consensus of most people that no, it's not possible. So it's not happening. And yet we start to see that when that, when the conviction isn't strong enough, notice even in the telepathy tapes, it's important that you believe in them, right? It's important that you show that you believe that they can do this. And that is because the consensus has to have a lot of data points that saying, yes, we believe in this. Yes, we believe in this, right? So then it will manifest that thing as a possibility. And that's part of the infinite possibility space. So all of that in view, there's still what you would call an objective trajectory of this whole wave function, whatever it is. And I think that what we're starting to see now is the possibility to communicate like laterally between the worlds and say, do you see this? Yes. Do you see that? No. Interesting. And then we start to kind of exchange notes with the parallel realities and we start to understand the more objective scale of what's happening here. And because what I saw in one of my very, very vivid visions is that In your reality, as it unfolds for you, like just like you said, there is no me. So I'm definitely just a projection in your reality, and I'm just a projection, and vice versa. But this is not metaphorical. So literally, I am not a real person in your reality, and you're not a real person in my reality. However, you do exist, and I do exist, but in our own realities. And what happens is there's a mainframe, there's an overarching system. It sounds like an extremely wasteful computational framework, because then you would just put everybody in the same environment. But the reason it's built this way, from what I understand, is that it's the safest system. Because if either you or I decide for some reason start hurting people, we're actually not hurting anyone. We're just hurting the avatars, the projections of our own reality, but nobody conscious is actually getting hurt. However, the mainframe does register what you do. So it feeds that information to the rest of realities. So in my reality, when I'm interacting with your projection, whatever the most likely thing that you would do in particular situations, it would feed that information into my reality and say, well, usually he would do this or that if you would say this and this to him. So you would behave as you would in your own reality, in my reality, but you're not actually in, like, a real thing in my reality. So that way everybody kind of, so this also makes sense to me of that vision that I know a lot of people have, which is like there's no one else in your reality. But it's not that just there's just you and nothing else. It's not solipsism. No, they all exist. It's just that they're all completely scattered from one another. But there is this way of communicating between the worlds, between my reality and your reality. And I do believe that the code is actually that mainframe code. It's
Hmm.
telling all the systems how everything behaves and what makes sense and all of that stuff, basically.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad I didn't watch too many interviews with you because I wanted to kind of hear these things kind of fresh in my ears for the first time, and that that really tracks with a lot of what my higher self was showing me. Was showing me like there's this. We all have individual timelines. Then there's like this collective timeline. So the metaphor it was showing me was like we all kind of play like our own offline games, and those offline games have like the same physics engine and things are happening like they should happen. And then there are times when we jump into the same online game together where we're actually interacting with that version of ourselves versus like avatars of that version or non-existent versions. And it was actually kind of telling me like, Seibo, this is where your three-dimensional brain is going to start kind of falling apart, because like understanding this through the mind, it's just trying to imagine like a four-dimensional shape. We can just imagine the height, length, and width in that fourth dimension. We would have to, I've only seen them in like these 4D models that I've seen online of like a hypercube kind of like folding itself into each other. And what my higher self was recommending to me was like, Seibo, okay, you've built up enough of a vocabulary and kind of understanding that, this base physical reality isn't the actual reality. There's more depth and layers to it. And what it was instructing me to do was to really like live my life like I'm playing a video game. When you play a video game, you're not trying to die on purpose or do you're still you're trying to have fun and win the game. So it was like, hey, you could win the game by either struggling and like just being so committed to winning the game, or you could have fun and just kind of pick up on the patterns that happen when you're just playing video games and learn how to beat the levels. The choice is up to you. And ultimately, I think like the when it showed me like how we are playing like offline games and then we could come together on the online game, it was like the closest thing that kind of helped me understand like, oh, I'm not actually interacting with Dan right now, even though it seems like I'm interacting with Dan. But there's like a version of Dan in my offline game, and then there's also the I guess the conscious agent, if we use Hoffman's vernacular, that I could also have some actual interaction with during specific times.
Yeah, no, the offline game is a great metaphor. I think I'll be using it from now on. It's a perfect example. Yeah, offline game, and yet the information about what I would do in your offline game is being informed by the mainframe that knows what I'm doing in my own offline game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I do love about like technology. Kind of like, it was showing me like, I once asked like, "We are all one." What does that actually mean? And then it was showing me like, "Oh yeah, well you kind of have technology that like social media that gives you like some insight into like Dan's life or someone else's life. But if you could kind of extrapolate that into, well, what if you couldn't curate exactly like what you wanted to show someone else, but someone had access to that information, kind of like a blockchain where everyone sees the same ledger of information." And it was showing me like, yeah, as we start scaling up these higher dimensional or higher frequential realities, instead of like using words to communicate, we can telepathically communicate. And then when we start forming into like this one thing, it's less about losing our individual identity, but more of having access to more of all that is, or the universe, or all the dimensions. And you know, when I was in college, The Matrix came out, and that really kind of like I was like, "Whoa, that is such like a crazy idea." And in my opinion, it's more or less been proven with stuff that you're doing, or even if you look at like how much actual matter is in an atom. There's its majority is empty space. I believe I read something that if you collapse the empty space of all 8 billion humans on the planet, the total amount of matter would fit inside like a sugar cube. So like I started
It's
looking.
it's a nice meme. That's not true though.
That's not true.
No, no.
Oh,
No.
what? Yeah, let's clear this
Yeah,
up. Like,
sure.
what is
Yeah,
it
no, no, it's
actually?
definitely not true. So it relies on, well, notice that the people who tend to say this are the same people that tell you that the physical is not the main story. So if the physical is not the main story, then the focus on what we measure as the physical particles being mostly empty space is a completely, it's a moot point. It's besides the point. If you're saying that the physical is not real, then it's irrelevant to the point you're trying to make right now. But also, even from a physics standpoint, it's not like that space is empty. First of all, it's very active, right? The space in between the what we call matter, it's filled with what we call virtual particles. So it's there's enormous amounts of energy there. So if the point is that the point like particles um, are not the main thing that is operating the thing, well, that's a given. That's a given even to a physicist. These are just models that we use to represent something that is much more complex than that, which is the probability diffusion of where how quantum fields interact. So if you want to put a more concrete answer to that, which quantum fields are the real thing,
Mm,
and then particles are just excitations in these fields. But these quantum fields are continuous, so they're everywhere. There is no point in which they're not in. So in that sense, most of things is quantum fields. So now that obviously doesn't fit into a nice meme. So people say the atom is mostly empty space, but it's a ironically, or just from a punny standpoint, that's a vacuous claim. It doesn't add anything to the picture. It doesn't tell you anything about the world, and it doesn't actually mean anything. It's aside from an implication that the thing that we're focusing on is not the main story. But again, even a physicist would tell you that, yeah, I mean, we know that. Like, it's not, that nobody's against that idea. Um, I think that the important thing is always to try and see what is the applicable value of the frames that we hold, because in the end of the day, I think if we really want to put the humility hat, we have to admit, from a physics standpoint, but also from the spiritual standpoint and from the religious standpoint, we don't really know what it is, right? Nobody really knows what it is. The real thing is truly unspeakable, like whatever it truly is. Because even from the most logical standpoint, if if you're saying, if the postulation is that we're all one, in other words, you're talking about this state of being the awareness that is all, well, I would say it wouldn't have the same kind of qualities that we do, because it is different than what we are, because we are units in a whole, and it is the whole, and that is very different because there's nothing outside of it. So if by definition it has no external environment, it won't have any reason or even logical consistency to have any outwards pointing vectors, because there is no out. So, in other words, the reason that we feel like anything is because there's this implication that there's this and something else. But if the totality of your existence, if the state of consciousness that you occupy as this postulated all, or because I know higher self is not quite that, but like God or whatever you want to call it, like the ultimate sphere of awareness, if by definition it is the all, there is no it and something else. There is just it. And that's a very different kind of state. I would claim, and this is also what Bernardo Castro points out, for it will not have a self-awareness because it is just the totality of everything. So it has no reason to have any awareness of something else than itself because it is the total. So it is the ultimate snake that eats its own tail. You can't actually have it being conscious because conscious means having symbolic representations within it. But because symbolic representations point to something, it implies that there's a you and the thing that it points to. But if you're the total, again, that goes out the window. There is no symbolic representation of the all because it is the all. Nothing is excluded from it. And that is a very different, you see what I'm saying?
No,
So,
totally.
yeah, so in that sense, all of these ideas we have about who has the more accurate frame, and there's everybody are constantly in this game of one-upsmanship of like who has the crazier idea about what reality is and how it all connects. Ultimately, they're all little bubbles of perceptions that play a particular game in a particular space, and it's doing a particular function. The types of functions uh, you can execute would have to depend on all the I would call them symbolic representations. In our case, it's physical and mental ideas that we have about the physical space that then translate to physical representations, like ideas that become objects and so on and so forth. But all of that is still within this very limited scope game where, well, it allows us to do X, and this model allows us to do Y. If I want to bring my being to a certain state, postulating everything about quantum physics might not be the right conceptual tool, but understanding things about how potentially reality can work from from the first person, that might be a good tool because it allows you to experience the world. That's the focus, right? You meditate, you focus on your body, you focus on your breath, you focus on certain mantras or whatever it is that you're doing, but it has to do with the focus on the experience itself. And as we're now seeing with people like you, and again, I'm meeting more and more people like you, which is amazing and incredible, that we understand, oh, this is not just like a you go to a retreat to feel good. Like, no, that's like a real thing. Like we interact with these higher spaces that are actually really existing, and we expand into being able to interact with them. It's almost like limbs that we didn't know we have, and now we're learning how to move them. We're slowly learning what is the dexterity of these elements, right? So that's a real thing. But if I'm going to keep thinking about the Large Hadron Collider, that frame doesn't lend itself to evolve into the space that you're evolving with the awakening. But it's also true in the other way around. You won't be able to build certain technologies, physical technologies that we might need over time, if you just postulate the inner space. Because
Yep.
eventually you would have to overcome the fact that the sun will become a red giant and engulf the earth. That's a physical effect that we would have to overcome. So you need both. We need both frames, I would say. And ultimately, it's not, to me, it's never either or. It's what are you trying to do, and then finding the best frame to do that thing and entertain it.
Exactly. I 100% agree. And just really quick, how much more time do you got?
I have another meeting at 1:30,
Okay.
and I would prefer to at least have a bite before. So maybe another 30 minutes I have.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I'll keep it short. So I want to make sure that you are
No, I
good
mean,
for your
30
next
minutes is
meeting.
good. I mean, even if we go a little bit over, if let's say 40 minutes,
Okay.
just so
Okay.
we don't feel time pressure.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. So I want to get to the stuff that we were just talking to, but I want to rewind a little bit because I have been saying this whole we could all fit into like a sugar cube thing. Probably said it to more people than I could remember. So I think if I heard correctly, is that the empty space isn't like a void. There's stuff there, or the quantum field. There's other things in the empty space. So it's not really an empty space.
Also,
Um,
there's no, and sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I did lose myself a little bit in my in my rant. But the shorter thing to notice there's no actual particle. That's not a real thing. there's a diffused probability space of something happening, but it's more of like a smudge. We use the word particle because from a quantum standpoint, we have to measure, there you go. We have to measure something to say it happened here. But that's what gives rise to the confusion between the uncertainty principle. But the truth about what the real object is that we call particle, it's not a particle. That's not there's no such thing. It's, and every physicist would tell you this. It's more as a smudge of a probabilistic space, and it's a technical explanation. But, and I'm sure you're aware of it. But just for the listeners, yeah, that's where it gets a little dicey. If you really mean to say it's mostly empty space, it isn't, because it's not even a particle to begin with. You see what I'm
So
saying?
more of a wave than a particle.
Well, no, it's not a wave either, but it's more of a probabilistic smudge. That's why I call it that, because it's not a wave either.
Oh,
It behaves like a wave according to certain measurements, but these tools are just incoherent when it comes to the real expression of what the wave function really is. And
interesting.
it's not that I'm saying that I have the answer, but it's definitely not a wave or a particle or a wavicle or any of these terms. It's just it's a it's a state that for your point of view gives rise to an effect that to you would look either a particle or a wave, or it can also appear as other things depending on how you measure it and what states you're putting it in. If you cool it down enough, it becomes Higgs um, forget what it's called. Einstein condensate. I forget the first word now. My brain is farting right now. But Higgs boson condensate or something like this. But it's a state of matter in which essentially the particles no longer know their separate identity. That's how it's expressed to the public. But the truth is that is the more natural state of matter. So like the bubbling and the excitation of higher energy states, which we are. This is already a higher energy state. Uh, it it suffers from the confusion of separation. But ultimately, if you cool things down enough so you get them not excited, they go back to their base state, which is this superposition state where
Got it.
really electrons do not know that they have separate identities. They behave like one thing, and that is
Okay.
the more natural state of the
Okay,
world.
so
Yeah.
we're more talking about the superposition state then.
I'm talking about the nature of the world. So the what's wrong with the statement "it's mostly empty space" is even the postulation that first there was a particle that we somehow can measure the boundaries of, in which there is empty space. There's no particle. So what are you talking about?
Got
So there's
it.
no so there's just possibility space, and the way that it appears from an observer perspective has to do with how you constructed, what laws of physics you occupy, which are one of many, right? And it also has to do with the measurement possibility. Okay, one way to nail it down relatively concretely is, so in Wolfram's recent models, they have something called the Ruliad, which is the graph of all possible rules.
Okay.
And what he said that really resonated strongly, and I do really think they're right on the money there. He said that what he discovered and really surprised him was that he used to think that at least the laws of physics are universal in such a way that if, no matter how advanced a civilization would be or how far it is in space, at least we could agree that the electron is the electron. And then he
Wow.
said, I don't think that anymore. Because I understood that if you look from the perspective of the Ruliad, which is the most fundamental space, so the space of all possible rules that give rise to all the possible perturbations of what is possible in space and time and any other, even there might be more than one temporal dimensions. But what's interesting is that if you find yourself in a different part of the Ruliad, so if I'm over here and you're over here, then we're going to look back at the beginning of the universe together, but your cone from the rule space
Wow.
looks different. Even though you're looking at the same laws of physics, you will see different laws of physics, even though we're in the same space. And it might have something to do with the exact position where you're in the rule space, which would determine all your physical parameters and include your size. So, for example, a good example is that the Earth, if it is conscious, it would have a very different perception of time just because of its size. Because on the scale of the
Mm.
Earth, it in the time dilation is a very felt effect because it's a real thing. There's a bubble of time that is literally moving slower, substantially slower on the filament of what the Earth is, versus when you go way further. But for humans, that's an unnoticeable effect. Something that we do have here on Earth that is much more terrestrial demonstrates this a little bit is the difference between us and ants and the way they interact with water because of surface tension. So
Ah.
surface tension of water is an effect that has to do with the properties of the molecules of water, but over a certain amount of collection of them, that surface tension becomes almost irrelevant, right? To a blob. This is why we can't hold a bubble of water, because surface tension is not enough to hold a bubble of water of this scale.
Oh,
But for
that
ants,
makes sense. Hey, hold on. Hold your thought real
sure,
quick. I
sure,
gotta use the
sure.
restroom really, really
Go, go,
bad.
go,
Okay,
go,
just
run,
give me a
run,
second.
run.
I'll be right back.
Go.
All right. Sorry about that. The ants, water tension. That's where we left off.
So, hold on, now I'm chewing on chocolate.
Take your time. Take your time.
So with water tension, it's very clear because we can see a physical example of that, right? An ant can hold a water bubble, and it's like a water sphere, right?
Hmm.
And they hold and walk around with it. If a human tries to do that, it will just wash you with water. You can't. There's no bubble of water of that size that can hold, right? But that's just an effect of an arising property of the physical laws, because water tension is an arising property of the aggregation of many molecules in a particular gravity. So it's pretty parochial. It's pretty here on Earth because of exactly the gravity we have, right? But you would have effects similar to that on different planets of different scales. They would just have a different water tension, right? So now, actually, I don't even know enough about that. I don't even know if water tension would depend on gravity. I think it would, but you see my point,
Yeah.
right? And then on a larger scale, even things that to us seem to be, out there ideas like time dilation, which, kind of like an interstellar, when time would be different next to a black hole to like a substantial degree, where every second for you would be like 7 years for them. That's a felt effect for something of a scale of an Earth. But if Gaia is true and Earth is conscious, it would be experiencing time in a very different way than you do. Now take this to the next like level, where if you in a different place in the rule space, then even the laws of physics will look different. Like and that would actually make sense of a lot of, more of the wacky ideas about, like, what the DMT space might be, what consciousness might be. But it's just that my question always is, what stands behind the statement? What is it designed to invoke in you? Right, the statements of the flavor of it's mostly empty space. I would say with that statement, it's mostly designed to invoke awe and the principle that most of the time the things we think are true are very, very often not what we think they are. The irony with this statement is it itself postulates a state that we don't actually think. Like it uses a leverage, it uses it tries to leverage something that doesn't actually exist. Nobody actually thinks that particles are a real thing. So they postulate a thing there. It's almost like when people say, well, you just said it yourself, right? We're all one. And then I always say, okay, what does that mean? Like, what is the statement for, right? If the statement is for to say, well, I think it's because some people say it in different ways. Some people want it to mean we should treat each other better because we're all one. To that, I would say that's a bad reason to want to do the right thing. You want to do the right thing even if it's another and not just because it's you, right? That's pretty selfish. Also, where's it written that just because it's you, you treat yourself well? We treat ourselves like shit all the time. So, like, we tell ourselves all kinds of crazy things about ourselves. So that is once again, I always look at what the statement is designed to invoke in the other human. And then, because there's always a better way to do this without invoking all of these extravagant thoughts that very often also confuse. If it's expressed in a true sentiment of trying to build together, then I'm very happy about it being expressed this way. I guess I guess what I'm noticing is that very often it is being expressed from a, like you said, the spiritual community sometimes suffer from this element of like just a little bit too much delusion, and that lends itself to a very almost like a narcissistic kind of like worldview that actually goes against what you would want the spiritual world to invoke. Like people that start believing in they put front and center certain abilities that they might develop, right? Like I can heal you, I can. So it becomes about them having special powers. Like it's like, oh, I'm like part of the X-Men. Like I've where really I think the more you walk along the path of awakening, it's such to become clear that these are impediments to awakening. They're not steps along the awakening because they bring you back into attachment to like, oh, I'm special, I'm doing these things, I have these abilities, versus no, we just step into a space where everything is more possible and you just allow for whatever in fact is happening, which is a very different kind of space. So that was, and there was another thing you said right before the particle was empty. There was another statement you made. Do you remember what it was?
Uh, oh man.
It doesn't really matter. But yeah. So yeah, first of all, yeah, I would say that the statement of like the particle is mostly empty space, just it's just nothing. It's like it's not saying anything. It's not
Well,
saying anything to me. It's not saying anything of value.
yeah. Well, to me, it's the reason why I said it was that, Hoffman had a really good explanation for like your desktop and like your pixels are representative of these two-dimensional icons that mean something, like a Word document, a recycle bin, things of that nature. And so when I heard about like these atoms, and if you collapse the empty space, it made me think about, oh, maybe atoms are like the three-dimensional version of a pixel. Like it's representative of something, but what it's actually representing, there's a deeper reality to it than, like the deeper reality to the pixels is there's some code behind that. And the deeper reality to the code is behind the screen is resistors, transistors, capacitors, diodes that make up the screen. But the pixels allow you to interact with the interface in a much more, I guess, efficient, effortless way. And then I was thinking, oh, perhaps molecules and atoms are like the three-dimensional version of a pixel. We still have like a physics engine for our planet, and the physics engine could be different depending on which part of the funnel you're standing in. And for me, it was just more of like, oh, okay, hey, what most people think of base reality, 3D physical space time, possibly there's something deeper than that. So that was kind of the meaning of that to me.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, for sure that's the case. I would place the pixels with probably with a lot smaller than that. I would probably place the pixels from a physical standpoint somewhere around the Planck scale. That will be your pixels.
Okay.
because by definition you can no longer divide it even mathematically. You start getting probabilities that are more than 100%, which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It's just that it seems that the vectors flip. Like you no longer, it's an incoherent tapestry of that no longer applies to you. And the other pixels, I would say, they have to do with conscious moments, which I think the thing you were saying about frames per second really resonated, because it's what I think is happening with DMT. I think it allows you to see more frames per second of rendering, more computational steps of reality per time unit.
Yeah.
What allows you to see all these extra things. It's interesting that you mentioned that in the context of being able to perceive it from uh, doing certain kinds of meditations. Yeah, I'm super interested to do the Joe Dispenza and to tell you what I'm experiencing from it. Is it what is it based on? Because it sounds like you're pretty knowledgeable also in the the other kind of contemplative practices. If you would have to summarize it in terms of other things that exist from Vipassana, Dzogchen, Anapana, like where's the focus? Is it on the visualization, on the body, on the breath, combination of these things?
It's a combination of those three. And one of my friends that is really into Kundalini yoga had told me that he's basically teaching like Kundalini and being able to have an awakening or Kundalini activation through his techniques, just utilizing a different language. And one of my good friends was teaching me Kriya yoga, which the way that he described it to me is Kundalini is like pushing that energy up your energy centers and then having that awakening. So if you haven't dealt with past trauma or you have some distortions, it will also amplify that. So people that experience like the dark night of the soul, it's from just pushing that Kundalini energy up. And so in Kriya yoga, it's more about clearing out the energy centers, and the energy will naturally want to rise. So as you clear out the energy centers, you basically do a bunch of shadow work and things that allow you to integrate your trauma so that when the energy finally does rise up and you have that awakening, it has less of the distortions that may feel like, the dark night of the soul. And I have had, I'd probably say 4 or 5 of these when I was doing Kriya yoga that were absolutely like a heroic dose of DMT, where it was so visceral, so real. And at least for me, being, I wouldn't say I was a hardcore atheist, I was always open to stuff, but, my eyes and ears and my senses only showed me like when people die, they just go into the ground. But when I started having these transcendent experiences without exogenous molecules, that's what kind of made me go, whoa, okay, maybe it's not something I'm taking that's giving me this ability. Maybe it's innate within me. And so um I would explore some Kriya yoga. To me, I feel like that kind of aligns with my kind of
How do you spell that?
Kriya.
Kriya yoga.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I'll send you some videos that I utilize that have really helped me kind of conceptualize
Yeah.
all these
But
techniques.
also if you can share the specific one with Dispenza that you did, I would. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that you're basically opening like whatever trapped energies you have, and the channels might be blocked in kinds of ways. So when you do Kriya Yoga or the Dispensa meditation or some other practices that are like that, they're essentially opening these channels, and all these things start to come up. And if you had any energy that festered and created some kind of a very disjointed trajectories, it will start coming through your experiential side, and that will start manifesting as content. And if the energy was of like already of like a dark flavor, it would express itself in your experience this way. So these techniques, they allow you also for containers to help you experience that without it like jarring you and making you feel like you're going through hell or something like
Dude,
this.
absolutely, absolutely. That's a beautiful explanation. And for me, what I realize and where I'm connecting this is, you were listening to that podcast yesterday and you just started getting this information. You just started typing it out. Mine was very similar, which was, I wasn't looking to connect with anything. I'm just sitting there doing the meditation. And all of a sudden, it's like I hit the right frequency band where I can start downloading some of that information. And my wife, she will actually hear things and like see things in her mind's eye. The way that I describe it, for me, it's always like a zip file. I just get a zip file and then it's like very dense with information, and then it starts like unpacking throughout the day. So like throughout the day it's like, oh, okay, that's what that means, that's what it means. And so when you were saying that you got that download, to me I was like, oh yeah, that whatever you were watching put you in that right frequency where you were able to tap into that, universal information. And the reason why I just committed so much to the meditation practice was, I don't know if you're old enough, but I was old enough to have radio when I was younger, and there would be like little
I'm,
presets.
I'm 40. I'm 42.
Oh,
Actually, funny enough, I'm gonna be 42 in like a week or two.
oh, dude, you look great, man. You look great for 42.
You look amazing in 48, bro. It's like insane.
Thank you. And so I just started going, oh, I'm kind of landing on these frequency bands by chance when I'm sitting here for 90 minutes. But is there a way to kind of have presets where, like, instead of sitting for 90 minutes and randomly hitting it, can I sit for 10 minutes and like hit 99.7 every time? And so that's the skill that I've been cultivating. But at the end of the day, as you said, like being able to channel, being able to astral project, being able to remote view, if it's not making you more present, if it's not making you more compassionate, if it's not allowing you to be more loving, then they're just distractions. It's just like learning how to juggle or play basketball. They're just skill sets that you could cultivate. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it was what was shown to me was if your day-to-day life isn't tangibly getting better, then this is a distraction for you. And so
Yeah.
I love exploring all of that, but I kind of judge like, oh, am I kinder to my wife? Am I present with my children when they come from school, as kind of like my barometers of spiritual growth.
Yeah. That's the thing that I find the most important is how is this? This is why I have such a strong connection now to how we use language, which is why I went on this, like, I don't know how long rant about what these statements make, because you, like you said, you meant it one way, but I'm sure you would agree with me. There's very often what happens is that people kind of preach to others, and I never took it what you said to be that way, but we are speaking on a podcast, so other people would hear it,
Right.
and I know it says something to people, and it's important for me to always outline this. I don't think it's a side point that very often you find people kind of like preaching to other people about, oh, but you should do this and that, and they use phrases like that which they themselves don't understand, and it doesn't actually better them as a person. So if it leads you to a better outcome in terms of how people feel when you leave the room, what does your business life looks like, what does your life looks like, what are these components of integration, how do they play themselves out in your life, aside from the I know this or I know that? Okay, how do you know it here, or do you know it here? Do you like express that knowledge in the way that you live your life? To me, everything you're saying right now is like gold. This is like, this should be the entire focus of everybody, I think, at this point in humanity, because we have everything we possibly need, everything we possibly need. And by the way, I was getting into these with people, which are fun to me, and I think hopefully to them as well in my lives, where so many people that are like more of the spiritual flavor come in, and they have such recoiling from this version of humanity as a technological humanity that goes into the galaxy, and I love it. I love it. It's my favorite thing. It's like, go Elon. Like, I'm like, let's go to space. Like, I'm super happy to do that. But the focus should be not just the ability to do that, but to do that in a way that we're also really enjoying the ride. So if we bring the sacredness with us, we will build technologies that will be beautiful, and they would ornament the universe, versus just these technical things that just kind of do a thing. Versus, if we build a Dyson sphere, let's build one that makes the star more beautiful, that accentuates the star. It makes it in a way that the universe would go, yes, I
Yes.
didn't think of that, but that's amazing. Yes. So like that's the kind of civilization we want to be, like so everything is happy about us being around, basically.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I want to make sure you have enough time to eat before your next
Sure,
meeting.
sure.
So the one thing that I did want to discuss with you, that kind of just came up um, was the idea of we are all one. We are all one. And I've had this like conceptually I understood it, like, okay, we are all one, that makes sense. But then when I would think about, like, I'm the same as like Hitler, or like, then my mind starts going like, well, I don't think I would ever do that stuff. Like, it was hard for me to connect. And so when I went into a meditation, the reason why this got brought up was because you're talking about Bernardo, was that, well, if you are this one homogenous thing, like, there's nothing outside of you. And so what it was showing me was like, if we are, okay, so if Danny, if you were the only one on this planet, you would not know if you were like a good researcher or bad researcher. You're just doing research. But if I was there with you, then I could say, oh, this research is awesome, or this research is horrible. And then you would have like one reflection of who Danny is. And so it was showing me like, first, it's the one, the homogeneous one. And then the homogeneous one, I guess, I don't know, gets curious or something. So it turns into everything everywhere all at once, so that it has infinite perspectives to kind of reflect back to it what it actually is. So what we would think is good and bad, right or wrong, it's all kind of neutral in our world. Obviously, I prefer having fun than suffering. So we look at suffering as worse and having fun as better. But from the one's perspective, they're just experiences that are being reflected back to it. And for me, that kind of satisfied my curiosity of like, if we are this one thing, then why are we so different? And then it was showing me, oh, yeah, it's just we're fractals or holograms of the one, kind of reflecting back to the one what this infinite possibilities could be. So it was showing me like, I was like, okay, so what was before all of these parallel realities? It was like, no, there was no before. You're still thinking in this linear time construct of like, there had to be something before that. So it was showing me existence just always is. So like, all of these picture frames always existed. Now what changes is the path that we all take all to these different frames to create our individual timelines. And that would be infinite, but time is a property of existence. Existence had always just been that way. And so I guess when you said first principles, that really resonated with me, because when I design stuff or do anything, I kind of go to first principles. So I'm always like wanting to go, well, what was before that? What was before that? So I was curious, like, does my explanation, does that resonate with you? Or yeah, I was just
Yeah,
curious.
it definitely resonates with me. It's just that I think that what we mean at the moment by the one, that we're all one, it's a local one. So the only way for us to meet the true one is to be the unified local one that then will unify with the other ones, and then all of those ones would be the reflector for the ultimate one. And I think that's because on the one hand, when you start saying that, people say, it's funny because, again, I'm not talking to you obviously because we're only now interacting, but I do have this experience enough to know what is the average of what how people go about this, right? And then it's almost always the same, which you start saying that, they're like, yeah, but that's like, what's the relevance of it? I was like, well, what was the relevance of what you said? It's like it's like, like, if we're already playing this game, let's play the game. So by the logic of what is being presented, it's it's just the reason that I kind of know that is because I see the other ones. I see what they are, and they're not us. For sure, they're not us. There's some that are so alien, it's not even funny. Like, they're not human in any shape or form, but they're not even of the same kind of one that we are. They have a completely different set of possible things. They're like, for all intents and purposes, they're a different branch on the multiverse,
Right.
right? So the insectoids are like that. They're very different. Now, they fit into a criteria where we kind of know on Earth from insects, but they're not even that. There's something very different. Then there's the jesters that are very weird. They're like, each one of them is like a whole civilization all by themselves. They're not uh, occupying any particular level. They're on all the levels. Their state of being encapsulates the yin and the yang perfectly at every
Mm,
instant. So they're the ultimate evil and the ultimate good all at once, right? And you can't really tell because they can't tell, and and their function is very important because they can literally see the split at the same time. They can experience the fact that ultimately, and the omega, the ultimate suffering and the ultimate bliss, they're one and the same. There's no difference whatsoever. They're the same feeling. It's just that they have different frames, right? And then so they have a very important functionality. Then there's the ones that are without the bodies, the ones that are like made from like I don't know 160 dimensions. They're not us. Like they're not our higher self. They're not our one, not at all. Okay. And also, if you think about it, why would it be? Why would it be God us? Isn't that a little bit self-centered? It's if you're talking about the God Almighty, the one that is above it all, right? That thing is so beyond conceptual frameworks or so beyond perceptions that there's nothing in existence can ever, from a unitary perspective, point to it in its mind's eye and say the one. Like your mouth would not move to do that. You can't. It's impossible to point to a vector towards it, right?
Yeah.
So the thing we mean by that is our local one. And then it's part of a much larger system that can, so the way that I see it, if I have to kind of, throw a wild guess, and this is a very big postulation, so nobody takes me up on this as a claim, but I think that the only moment we're going to start truly meeting the aliens, the ones that are truly different than us, is when we're going to finally unify. So when we get to a place when we fully awaken to our actual unified field, like you and I will feel itself to be one at all times, and everybody would experience it this way. And I actually think that the internet is the part of the physical story of that. But essentially, when we get to that point, then we will all of a sudden, for lack of a better term, evolve a unified face. We're going to have some facing frame of all of us, and then we will turn around and we will meet the others, but as a
Mm.
unified field. We will not meet them separately. There will be no ships appearing in the sky. You will first become this unitary thing, and you will start going, oh, like, oh my god, like I'm this thing, which is I think you're getting glimpses of right now. And then that thing will turn around and meet the others, and then from there you start playing with the yeah from there you start playing with the reflection of the actual one. But at the core of what you said, yes, resonates very, very strongly. What you
Yeah.
said, that is very true.
I love that. I love that, Dan. Well, I really love your mind. I love your approach. And I love kind of like the practicality of like really bringing this type of information into your day to day life. So your current present existence is enjoying this beautiful reality that we get to navigate through. So if people want to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to find you?
The two main addresses would be my YouTube channel, Dango Thoughts, Dango Thoughts, and our website, codeofreality.com. Those are the
Beautiful.
main.
I will put those links in, and Dan does lives every single night. So if you want to learn more, interact more with Dan, you could go on live and listen to him talk about all these things. And I hope you guys have more questions than answers, because these questions are really, really awesome, curious things that you could really dig into and really better understand yourself at this fundamental level. So Dan, thank you so much for your time. You've given me an extra hour than I asked for. So I'm very grateful. And I love the work that you're doing. I think that the way that you're doing it is is the same way I would love to do it, but I just put in no effort. So I really kind of like feel like,
And I love your way, man.
yeah.
No, really, the way of the Tao is the thing that I'm trying to aim for the most. So the more I can do that, the happier I am. And the fact that there are people in the world like you that already found the path to just the path of least resistance, where you can just put the intention and allow it to just unfold. I'm very in awe of that, and I'm actually aiming to be more and more of that flavor. So I appreciate you and everything you're doing, and I hope that more of humanity will be able to occupy the state that you've reached so far.
Awesome. Well, I will see you in my timeline, Dan, for sure. And who knows, maybe we will, our next podcast will be on the hill, based on the
Oh
stuff
man,
that we
have you ever wait before we jump off? Have you ever experienced it yourself? Because it sounds like you're already like in these abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing, Dan, is when I was researching you, there is a guy that teaches astral projection that has watched your videos, that has done videos on astral projection. And essentially, you put yourself into the hypnagogic state, and then you could project your consciousness out of you. I've also done it utilizing the Project Gateway tapes as well. Those are
I tried that.
available on
I
YouTube.
did.
So,
Yeah, I did
absolutely.
those. I did the gateway. Yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah.
So would you so that's why I wanted to ask you, like, your recommendation is to do some of the, what you call, the Kriya yoga,
The Kriya yoga.
and some of maybe combine it with some of Dispenza's meditation, and then essentially through things like Gateway, you can bring yourself to kind of like the hill.
Absolutely. I don't know if I'm going to the hill, but there are astral planes where you can absolutely interact with other sentient entities. And I believe it's the same types of realms that you access on psychedelics, where you're able to touch or interact with different entities. And to me, it's more of just having like more sensitivity to that. Like the connections, I believe, are always there, just like the radio waves are always there. But depending on whether or not your antenna can pick up on the sensitivity or not. So, what I have found for me, at least, is the more I practice without the attachment that it needs to happen, counter logically, it seems to happen more. When I'm focused on an end result, then I'm just like, man, I just sat there for 90 minutes and nothing happened. So, it's kind of one of those counterintuitive things where the less attached you are to it, the more it just seems to come to you.
Amazing. Saibo, thank you so much for inviting me. I deeply appreciate the time, and
Dude,
we'll be in touch.
absolutely, Dan. You have a wonderful day. Take care.
I think you need to allow it to buffer, right?
Yep. Yep.